Hello everyone, I'm Adam Cole. I'm a science reporter at NPR, and today we're at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum celebrating the 50th anniversary of the television program and now massive franchise Star Trek. It was actually almost exactly 50 years ago. We got about an hour and a half, 2 hours to go until that program was first broadcast. So today we're going to talk about Star Trek and the way that it really epitomized a conversation between science and science fiction. So we're going to talk with one of the curators here, but as we explore this space and talk about science fiction, if you have a question, write in the comments, and then this will happen. This is our little Facebook alert. So if you want to give me a message, write in the comments, and I'll get hit by one of those green things. So we're welcomed here by Dr. Margaret Weidekamp. Thanks for having us.
I'm delighted.
I'm really excited to be standing in front of this model here. And before we get into this conversation about science fiction, we want to get to know you a little bit in a segment that we call These Are the Questions That We Ask Everyone. So there's 3 questions that we ask all the experts that we meet in these Facebook Lives.
Okay.
And the first one is very appropriate for today.
Okay.
It is there some science fiction thing, an element, some work that has had an impact on you and sort of your career?
Well, at risk of giving a very obvious answer, it is the 11-foot studio model of the Star Trek Starship Enterprise.
Okay.
It's an object that I came to be the curator of some 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I just finished a major conservation project that took about 5 years from beginning to end. From the very beginning of planning it, and we've really stabilized the model itself, repainted it, other than the top of the saucer, which is original 1960s paint. This is the original model that was in every episode of the original Star Trek.
So this was actually filmed
Yes.
on some sort of backdrop.
Before computer-generated imaging, if you wanted a spaceship in your TV show or in your movie, you had to physically build one and then film it, and this goes in front of a blue screen. You can see in the back there we have the stand that has some of the original blue on it still.
Wow, so we got these spinny lights. Can we get some close-ups on this great model? So
we really went to great pains to get all of the details right, down to the micron. Every window, every decal is exactly where it was at the end of production in 1960s.
So this is sort of a weird shape. Do you know anything about how this was designed? Like what went into, we think of, a lot of times spaceships are shaped like a classic saucer UFO,
yes,
or they're more like a plane.
Right.
But this is sort of something completely different.
This is completely different, and I think really set the tone for what every other imaginative ship designer had to deal with in the fictional realm after that. So this was designed by Walter Matthews Jeffries, who was the designer for Star Trek, and who was himself a pilot and worked on restoring aircraft. And so he used what's been called aircraft logic. He thought about what the parts would do. So instead of the undifferentiated flying saucer, we have a bridge at the top. We have an engineering section at the bottom. We have these nacelles at the back that look futuristic. They don't have kind of flames pouring out them the way that a Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon ship might have.
Sort of a functional design.
Functional design, and then a model that was built by Richard C. Dayton Jr.
Great. So second question in our series of questions. Is there anything in your work that people constantly get wrong? Is there something you have to correct people at parties, like, no, it's not like that, it's this? Because there's something, let's set the record straight right now.
Okay. It is the color of the Enterprise.
Okay.
What is the color of the actual Enterprise? And knowing I've learned a lot about the theory of color, also about using color in a pigment versus having color shown using light. And
I would say gray.
Gray, this is a little greener than sometimes people think. We went with this is what it would have looked like at the end of production.
Okay.
At the very beginning, the Enterprise was a flatter gray when it was created in 1964. But then through production, they added a lot of weathering and other details that really, you need a lot of texture and detail on a model so that it can withstand the studio lights and the post-processing that's then going to basically wash a lot of that out.
And I can imagine you'd also want a lot, you want it to have that texture detail, so when you get close, it still feels like this big thing.
Yes, it needs to feel big, and in fact, color scales as well. When you make something, if you made a model of this Enterprise and you made it smaller, you would need to make it lighter. If you used exactly this paint color, it would look too dark.
Wow.
So that is something that I don't know that people get wrong so much as that is hotly debated.
Okay, gotcha. I'm sure there's lots of hot Star Trek debates that are happening in the Facebook comments right now. So third question for you is, if you could have a career outside of this umbrella that you're in right now, and I think I forgot to mention your actual title, which I think is something like Social and Cultural Dimensions of Spaceflight. Curator of, comma.
Yes, so I work with our memorabilia of the actual space program as well as our space science fiction objects. I'm a working historian here at the museum.
So science fiction, memorabilia, history, all those things. So outside of that realm, if you could have any career, what would it be?
Especially when I was in graduate school, especially when I was writing my first book, which is entirely days spent very, very still and very cerebral. I always thought it would be a lot of fun to be a massage therapist. Just something that's like deeply physical, where you have to be very present instead of like kind of very up in your head. Where it's something that's very in the now and not 3 years from now someone will read this and tell me if they like it. So that's always been my little fantasy career, would be massage therapy.
There you go. Great. All right, so there's one more question. Oh, I'm getting hit by Facebook alerts. What do we got?
Will this model ever go on tour so others without the country see it?
So the question was, for those who couldn't hear, will this model ever tour so people don't have to come here to see it?
No, and that's part of why we're really delighted to do things like this Facebook Live, because it allows us to bring it to a much bigger audience. The model is about 200 pounds. It's 11 feet long. It's really big. And it is actually rather delicate. The design of it itself was really built so it looks like it can't exist well in 1G, right? It's all kind of cantilevered and splayed out. And at some level, then, it doesn't exist well in 1G. So it's a very well-joined piece of wood, but I wouldn't be
This is wood?
This is largely wood, a little bit of plastic, a little bit of metal. It was less expensive to just turn the wood and craft the wood than it was to mold plastic or metal. And cost is everything for television production.
Gotcha.
There
Looks like we got another Facebook alert. What do we got?
Well, as you can imagine, there's lots of questions regarding Star Trek right now.
Yeah.
One of them is, can you talk about Lucille Ball's relationship with the show?
Oh, yeah. Lucille Ball's relationship with Star Trek. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, Star Trek was actually produced by Desilu, which was the production company owned by Lucille Ball and her husband, Desi Arnaz, and then she later bought him out. And she was a wonderfully shrewd businesswoman. One of the decisions that she made when she was greenlighting Star Trek was that she wanted to film on film, and not just kind of television in the 60s would still have been very much the idea that you watch it and then you're done. And she wanted to actually create film copies of that, and NBC didn't want to pay the cost. So she said, fine, I'll pay for the film, but then I keep the rights. Which meant that Desilu owned all of the rights to syndication for Star Trek, which is, of course, where the money came to be made and where really the legend that was Star Trek really began.
Great. Awesome. Any other Facebook questions? All right, we're good to go. One question I wanted to ask you, and also the Facebook audience, is about that perennial question of who is the best Star Trek captain?
Is there ever any answer but Picard?
Well, we'd love to hear from you in the Facebook comments, what you think, and we'll see who comes out on top by the end of this. So let's move out here a little bit and talk about some of the ways that science informed Star Trek as a show. Were there things that the creators were thinking about that were coming out in the scientific world at that time that were incorporated?
I think very much that the creativity and the groundbreakingness of the design of the Enterprise has a lot to do with the fact that they knew that the audience was watching space shots on a regular basis in the 1960s and needed something that was more developed. And then they also played off of things that they knew the audience would know. So for instance, in 1947, this orange plane up here, the Bell X-1 Glamorous Glennis, is the plane that Chuck Yeager flew to basically show that there wasn't a sound barrier. We often say he broke the sound barrier to basically prove there was no sound barrier. You could go faster than the speed of sound, and the speed of sound became known as Mach 1.
Okay.
And so you could fly Mach 1.1, you could fly faster than that, and then directly above us
Okay.
is another experimental plane that by the 1960s, NASA and the Air Force were using this X-15, and this plane is actually black because the metal Inconel it's made out of is black, not because it's painted. But this could go up to Mach 6. So people knew that you could fly multiples of the speed of sound, and I think then it made sense when they start talking on the bridge of the Enterprise about we're going to go warp 1, we're going to go
So
warp 2.
what does that mean? That was a speed as well.
Warp 1 generally is considered kind of the speed of light, and then my understanding is that it's a somewhat exponential scale from there,
Sure.
so it's incredibly fast.
Okay, so
Which allows you to get from planet to planet in a
Right.
time frame that's still interesting for television.
every episode you
Yes.
get to a new one, I believe. So that's one way that sort of science was informing Star Trek. Are there ways that it went the opposite direction, where scientists or future scientists were watching Star Trek and were inspired by it, or even inspired to pursue specific technologies, that sort of thing?
Well, we know that the gentleman at Motorola, who
Okay.
developed the very first flip phone,
I think we have a
as-
picture of this.
There we go.
Yeah.
As a StarTAC flip phone. So
There it is.
Martin Cooper was
Looks
actually
like my first phone.
thinking very directly about that action of the communicator
The
on
communicator,
Star
I think we
Trek.
got one of those too, yeah. So here we have, I mean, it is pretty much, that's the idea, and a
Yes.
bit different from like those brick
Yes.
phones that were in
and
cars.
that it gives a little bit of action to it, and also I think generally the idea on Star Trek that we would be reliant on computers in a day-to-day way, that we would be talking to them on a regular basis, and I think that the phones that we all carry in our pockets and the sense that we always need to be connected comes in many ways from that.
Sure. And I remember there's a story, and you can correct me when I get this wrong, that, of course, the original Star Trek had a very diverse cast.
Yes.
And there were astronauts who were inspired, people of color who
Yes.
saw that and were inspired to become some of the first people of color in space.
Well, one of the stories that we tell over in our exhibit is actually about the fact that NASA hired Nichelle Nichols, the actress who played Lieutenant Uhura, and she did a public relations campaign
There she
for
is.
NASA in the 1970s when they wanted to recruit a more diverse class of astronauts for the space shuttle program, the very first class of space shuttle astronauts. And the Star Trek cast was a great visual example of what it would look like to have men and women of different races and different nationalities working together.
Exploring space.
So, and actually, Dr. Mae Jemison, who's the first African-American
Okay.
woman in
Oh, and
space,
here we got a picture of her, too.
directly credits Nichelle Nichols' campaign with her decision
Okay.
to apply to the astronaut
That's
corps.
amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's take a little break from. Let's take a break and address this Facebook alert.
How long will this exhibit be on display at the Smithsonian?
The Enterprise exhibit is actually a permanent part of the new Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall that opened just this past July. So it should be here for decades to come, and we look forward to having people come see it.
All right.
What are
Awesome.
some of the activities surrounding the anniversary?
Question from Facebook. What are some of the activities that are going to be happening here surrounding the anniversary?
Tonight on the actual anniversary, which is this Thursday at 8:30, we'll be watching The Man Trap, which was
Okay,
the
episode
original
one.
episode. We have Rod Roddenberry, who's Gene Roddenberry's son, is going to be
okay.
here, as well as Bijo and John Trimble, who are two of the fans and who worked with Roddenberry himself. They organized the write-in campaign by fans that got Star Trek its third season. They organized the write-in campaign that convinced the White House and NASA to name the first space shuttle orbiter Enterprise.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
That's a fun lineup. All right. Well, let's take a break from Star Trek for a second, and we're going to play a game that we call Mystery Object. We have a mystery object over here in this case, and we want you on Facebook to try and imagine what's the story behind this? What was this for? To me, when I saw this, I thought, wow, are we going to start talking about Star Wars? Because it looks a lot like sort of a Death Star, mini Death Star prototype. But we've got these sort of black panels all over it. What look like, these look like switches in here. All kinds of little doohickeys and this weird piece of a slinky on top. So, please weigh in on Facebook. What do you think this mystery object is? And while you mull that over, let's go over here to this wall and check out, this is the mural that I was standing in front of when we started this whole event. It's pretty striking. What can you tell me about the history of this?
Well, this is called the Space Mural. This is
Okay.
by Robert McCall. It was commissioned for this building, especially in 1976. This building opened as a bicentennial present to the country, July 1st, 1976. So for our 200th birthday, we gave ourselves an Air and Space Museum. And it's actually painted on linen on the wall. So it could, in theory, be removed if
Peeled
it
off
needed to
if
be.
you gotta move it.
But he wanted to really depict the state of the art in 1976, would have been the Apollo astronauts standing on the moon, as well as kind of visions of the future and visions of planets. It was a wonderful backdrop to the objects that we have here and to the Enterprise in particular. Robert McCall did illustrations for Star Trek The Motion Picture, and he also designed the very first STS-1 space shuttle mission patch and one of the very last space shuttle mission patches. So his space art had strong connections to both science fiction and spaceflight in reality.
And was there some sort of astronaut involved in the creation of this as well?
Yes,
something about that.
it is all painted by Robert McCall except for one star that's at the far, far end, the one kind of actually five-pointed star, and that was painted by Apollo astronaut and Apollo 12 moonwalker Alan Bean.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, let's check in on our mystery object again.
Yes.
Do we have any? Guesses as to what this might be from Facebook?
Yes, we've got a bunch of guesses.
All right. Can't wait to hear them.
The first one was, is it does it take pictures?
Okay. All right.
Something that takes pictures.
All right. Something that takes pictures.
Got a lot of guesses for some kind of communications
Okay.
satellite.
Communication satellite is a big guess.
And then I gotta give it up for my man Stephen R. Statton.
Stephen R. Statton. Great
Got
name.
there immediately.
Oh.
Guessing exactly what it was.
Which, and can you reveal the answer for those of us who aren't as quick as Stephen?
So this is a flight spare of Telstar, which is
Flight spare. What does
flight
that mean?
spare, which means that basically if you're going to send things into space, you don't only build one and send it, you build more than one to make sure that you have backup. And this is one that could have flown but did not fly. If
So
it-
this would
the
actually
one-
work if we put it up there. This is, well,
This
maybe
could
not
work.
At this point, but
Right now, it is an
was
active
designed to work.
telecommunications satellite. So it really, in some ways, symbolizes the beginnings of this modern world of satellite telecommunications that we live in. And it actually worked by relaying images and back and forth between a big ground station in France and a big ground station in the United States. And it actually orbited, so it didn't sit in geosynchronous orbit
Okay.
and stay over one point. You had to wait for it to be
So
in
little
range.
blips of-
You would get
of
little blips of
information.
information, but that was a very big deal in 1962.
1962. So how was this first used? What was being broadcast?
One of the
on
very
this?
first things was actually a press conference from
Okay.
President John F. Kennedy, but he wasn't. They were not entirely ready, so they did throw a little bit of a Cubs game
Okay, nice.
up. Initially, there were music performances. So one of the first things, some politics, some culture, that were, and some sports.
Right. So of course, baseball's got to be the first thing to
Yes.
come out of here. So
And-
these on the side, what?
So these are some of the antennas, and this would be
Okay.
spin stabilized largely,
Okay.
or spinning. And the black panels are actually solar panels,
Okay.
which are passive, which means, so the light hits them and they generate power. If you put a meter on those are drawing power.
Oh, still right now.
Still right now.
Okay. Wow.
So we keep joking that we should turn it into the world's slowest cell phone charger.
Facebook alert. What do we got?
Some folks would like to know, like Gabby Weiss, whether
Gabby
you
Weiss.
remember the song that was written about Telstar.
Oh, was there a song?
There was a song, Telstar by the Tornadoes. It is a instrumental, or I would sing all the words.
Okay. Maybe we'll put it in the comments there for those of you. We'll link
If you
to
go
a YouTube video.
look it up, you will
Yeah.
enjoy it. It evokes 1962 very nicely.
Great. So whatever became of this guy's twin, the one that was sent up there?
So the one
Is
that
it
was
still
sent up-
broadcasting baseball to this
Actually,
day?
no, ran for a very short time, and then actually there was a nuclear test that was done in the atmosphere, and it fried it. Which was
a
not
nuclear
the
test.
Yes, which was not the intention, but so it proved the concept, and it's a kind of tentative step into this telecommunications world.
All right, great. Okay, well, we got one more thing to look at here in the
Okay.
Air and Space Museum, and I should say that's where we are. If you're just joining us, we're at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. I'm Adam Cole. I'm a reporter with NPR's Science Desk. I run a blog and a YouTube channel called Skunk Bear. I'm here with Dr. Margaret Weidekamp, talking about science and science fiction, how they work together, inspiring each other. And so as we make our way, it's a huge museum, so we're going to make a trek across it. And as we do so, I want to share some facts about science. And maybe, I hope they're all correct. I've got a leading expert next to me. So one of the first things that you sort of think about is when did science fiction get its start, and what counts as science fiction? So I was reading about how there were ancient Indian poems that talked about flying to other worlds, and there would be technology that go underwater. That's what this picture shows, one of those flying palaces. And then, of course, there were mentions of sort of science fiction-y elements, things we think about that way. Going to other worlds again in the 1001 Arabian Nights, they talked about that a little bit. I was just reading a book about this guy, Johannes Kepler, he was a scientist who investigated planetary motion, and he ended up writing a short story called The Dream, which was basically, has sort of a claim to science fiction in some ways. We're making our way up the escalator. It's very exciting.
Yes.
It had sort of a claim to science fiction because it was his science that informed the story.
Okay,
He basically went, in the story, he has a dream, and either he or some character goes to the moon, and it's basically to say, hey, I just figured out how the moon orbits around the Earth. This is what it would look like from the moon, but it had all these elements. So some people were saying, well, that's the first science fiction. But it wasn't really anticipating, it wasn't looking to the future. It was like, oh, I figured this out.
Okay.
So it was sort of fantastical. So, of course, then the example that a lot of people bring up is Mary Shelley, this lady right here, who wrote Frankenstein. This is a woodcut, I think, yes, from one of the original editions of Frankenstein. Here we are in the bright, bright setting sun in Washington, D.C. And she was talking about sort of where will the science of biology go. So that's sort of one of the prime contenders for the first science fiction as well.
Yes, that's one I often hear cited.
Yeah. So then we get into, we're sort of in prime science fiction, and we get to people like Jules Verne.
Yes.
Would you say that's pretty much like we've arrived at science fiction at that point?
Yes, he's using actually science. So his From the Earth to the Moon, De la Terra a la Luna, includes equations and ideas about how you would scrub the air in the capsule using a particular chemical blend to actually remove the carbon dioxide from enclosed spaces. They were aware of Caisson's disease and bends and the dangers of being in an enclosed space.
So he was really thinking about the technological problems that you would encounter and how would you actually put people in space and that sort of thing.
And we know that Robert Goddard, who was the inventor of the liquid-fueled rocket, the American inventor, actually we know he had a copy of From the Earth to the Moon, and we know that he annotated it. He started writing his own notes and ideas, correcting and updating some of the equations.
So it was like, oh, that would never happen. It was this sort of trajectory.
Very much so.
Wow. So the pictures that I have are of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Do we want to move so we can see us a little bit better? Let's go over here. Right under this Exploring the Planets banner. Maybe right in this shaft of light. Perfect. Isn't technology great?
Which is actually a very nice place to
here
compare,
we
because
go.
we are actually looking at about discovering the planets, which was often very connected to imaginative ideas about space.
Right. We have Copernicus here, who inspired Kepler, the guy I was talking about, who wrote about going to the moon, and Galileo, one of his contemporaries, who actually they would correspond about these things. So I was just talking about Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which people read and inspired the construction of this guy, one of the first really working open sea submarines. He wrote another book called Clipper of the Clouds, I think it has another name too, that inspired Igor Sikorsky, who was a pioneer of helicopter technology. There's actually a Skunk Bear video on our YouTube channel about a prize that was then inspired by Sikorsky to make human-powered helicopters. Check it out. I recommend it. Little plug. And then we get to this man, H.G. Wells, who, of course, wrote War of the Worlds, which was made famous later by a radio broadcast. And I think his work inspired some people to think about science as well. He wrote another book called, I think it was The World Set Free, which was about, he had read these books about people sort of investigating the atom and talking about atomic power, but it wasn't possible at all. But he basically set down, hey, if we have nuclear power, we're going to have nuclear war. These are the sort of things that technology is going to bring. And someone who read his book actually went on to develop that technology. So it was a really sort of back and forth. And then the last picture I have to share is actually a Robert McCall.
It is, in fact, a Robert McCall
poster. Yeah. And what's this from?
This is from 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's 1968 imagination.
The reason that I wanted to share this one is because we have this little what looks like an iPad almost,
Very
like
much so.
sort of way that people have been imagining these technologies for a long time.
Yes. That you could have something wireless in your hand that would give you that kind of information was extraordinary in 1968.
Great. All right, well, so we made it up here all the way. Oh my gosh, Facebook alert. What's going on, Facebook?
Well, I just want to let you know we have a lot of votes coming in for Picard and Kirk, a couple for Janeway, and I'd like to see some more votes for Janeway there because that's who I like.
Yeah, Janeway's great. Famously a scientist, the most scientist of all the captains, I think, and she loved coffee. Coffee? Oh, he was just sharing with us that the votes are pouring in. I asked earlier for people to weigh in on their favorite Starfleet captain. And of course, as you might predict, Picard and Kirk are by far the favorites. But there are some votes for Janeway, who is producer Ryan's favorite captain. Don't forget Sisko. I guess he wasn't exactly a captain. He was at a space station.
Yes.
I'm not sure what his title was. Don't
he's
get
a
after
captain.
me, Facebook. All right, he's a captain.
I will
you
say
would
with
know.
authority, he's a
okay,
captain.
great. I'm glad I have this expert here to back me up. And of course, the most recent. I'm not sure if there'll be very many votes for the most recent captain.
For the Jonathan Archer Enterprise character.
Yeah.
And
but
we're
we'll
still
see.
waiting to see who will be the captain of Discovery.
Yeah, that's right. There's a
This
new
new
series
television
coming out.
series coming out in
Very
January.
exciting. All right, so we made it up here on this long trek of scientific facts, and I actually need one more thing from that. It should be right on top. There we go. I'm gonna share three things with you all, and I want you to tell me what they have in common. So the first one is this image right here. We've got a guy eating a sandwich, it looks like, someone eating some ice cream, and someone pouring something, I don't even know if that's coffee or what, into his mouth. So that's the first thing. Second thing, if you're to give me a minute, is a sound that I'm going to share. I'm just going to bring it up here. Here's the sound. I'm going to play it one more time in case you couldn't hear it. There you go. That's the sound. There's some weird bumping in there, but it's a dog. Sound file was originally titled Tame Dog, in case you were wondering. And then we've got this sound. It's a nice slide guitar. This is by a man named Blind Willie Johnson. So there you go. What do these things have in common? I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with the Air and Space Museum that we're in right now. So let's move towards the answer. And meanwhile, I'm hoping that you guys can guess what these objects. Remember, we had that picture of people eating and drinking in a very odd way. And then we had the sound of a dog. And then we had that song by Blind Willie Johnson, Dark is the night, cold was the ground. Dark was the night, cold was the ground. I'll put it in the Facebook comments later. So, are there any guesses coming in about what those three things, those three pieces of human culture, I guess you could say, or human experience at least, have in common.
Question, something to do with SETI.
Something to do with SETI, okay.
Indirectly.
Yeah, I think
a
that
little
we're getting
predating,
close.
But yes.
Any other guesses?
Something to do with Voyager.
Something to do with Voyager. Well, let's look up here. We're actually standing right underneath a replica. Is this a replica?
Yes,
Would that be
this
accurate
is
to
a
say?
mock-up, yes.
Okay, a mock-up of Voyager. And what was Voyager?
Voyager was a probe that was sent to the outer planets. There were two of them, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, and they were sent in the 1970s, and they knew when they sent them that the trajectory that they were on would lead them out of the solar system.
Okay, so this is heading out of the solar system right now.
Yes. Oh, yeah, they are the
We're right
farthest
on the
things
edge.
that human beings have ever created.
Great. If you're
There
joining
are
us
Twitter
right now,
feeds, I think, that tell you what. How
yes.
far?
Speaking of Twitter feeds, just shout out to the Facebook audience. If you're just joining us, we're here at the Air and Space Museum with Dr. Margaret Weitekamp, talking about science fiction, culture, space travel, and we're about to go see the object, or a replica of the object,
Yes.
that carried these three elements that I've been talking about into space on the Voyager. Right over here, I think, right?
Right here.
Okay, great. So what are we looking at here?
So this is a duplicate of the cover that was
Okay.
on the what's called the Golden Record, Sounds of Earth, that was included on the Voyager Interstellar Record, which was put on the side of the Voyager spacecraft as a bit of a message in a bottle, knowing that these spacecraft were going to head out of the solar system. The folks, Carl Sagan, Francis Drake, Andrian, who were working on these, were thinking about what does it mean to have humanity reach out of this cradle that we've been in. And
Which is, of course, a real inspiration for science fiction. Like half of science fiction is about that very question.
it's very much about, you know, what does it mean who we are here, and what does it mean to communicate farther out. And so
and
they
it was
really,
all put on a record.
and it was put on a record with the instructions of how to build the record player.
Oh, okay. That's good.
And
That's
in
important.
fact, some of these symbols here are a part of trying to create a language that aliens could read. So you start with a hydrogen atom, which we would think would be something rather
Okay.
universal. We have a little
Can
bit
you
of
see
a
that,
map.
Maya?
I don't know.
Can we get
Yeah.
in close enough to see that?
So we have a little bit of a map here of where Earth is in both space and time, based on the 14 nearest pulsars. And so all of this is basically trying to give the aliens some clues based on things that we would think would be constants across the universe, elements, pulsars, and that they would then be able to use some of the instructions to create a record that where they could then listen to this message
Right.
from Earth. And in some ways, it's a really creative moment in the 1960s of thinking of what did we want to, what message would we send about
Right.
ourselves as a planet, which means
Sort of
world music in a time when nobody was thinking about world music. Not only Blind Willie Johnson, but Chuck Berry,
From all-
Indian
and all over
ragas,
the world, yeah.
classical music, Chinese music, Japanese music, really greetings in 55 different languages. So really trying to think about who are we as humanity at a time in the middle of the Cold War when there were very strong, and there still are, national divisions, and we don't often think of ourselves
Yeah.
as a planet.
So yeah, this is sort of the all of humanity's Facebook profile, just boiled down. And so how do they make decisions about what to include? I mean, was that, it seems like there would be endless conversations and arguments about,
Oh.
no, we can't put that in, we got to put this in, I want my face in there,
Yes.
and I say hi mom on it, that sort of thing.
They did have a large discussion. They had a small committee that were trying to put it together. Annie Druyan, who was working with Carl Sagan and was later his wife, was really a driver on trying to pull all of the actual pieces together. The one piece that they wanted on this that they could not get was the Beatles' Here Comes the Sun. And they simply couldn't get the rights fast enough. And so that is, she always regretted that that wasn't there.
Well, I think maybe that'll be something to hold back for when the aliens come. We'll be like, hey, we got these people, the Beatles, they're pretty great. You thought that Blind Willie Johnson was good. We held something back for you.
There was a classic Saturday Night Live skit where they had gotten a message back from the aliens, and the message was, send more Chuck Berry.
Yeah, there you go. Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Do we have a definitive Facebook-approved captain from Starfleet? It's pretty evenly
Too
split.
close to call.
Too close to call. Oh, that's the way these elections
Maybe
sometimes go.
A little bit more in the card direction, if I had to guess.
Okay, all right. So it seems that people might share your
put
your
my
preference.
thumb on the scale.
Yeah, you may have. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. We'll see you at the Smithsonian at a future Facebook Live. I'm Adam Cole, NPR science reporter. Thank you so much, Margaret, for having us.
Thank you very much.